Welcome back. This is episode 129. In this week's episode, I'm going to focus on 5 ways to get the most from the Connecticut Higher Education Trust, otherwise known as the CHET Plan. I received a listener question a few weeks back mentioning that a listener had taken my advice on one of the tax tips that I mentioned and had opened a 529 plan, but wasn't sure where to begin with the investments and how to really make the most of this. So I thought I'd cover 5 different things that you should be doing to get the most from your CHET plan. And this could also apply to other 529 plans as well. So the first thing that you'd want to do to take advantage of this plan is to make a contribution so that you're getting the tax credit. As I mentioned a couple episodes ago, for my year-end tax strategies, one was to make a contribution to the Connecticut Higher Education Trust, the CHET Plan, because as a Connecticut resident, you're eligible to take a deduction of up to $10,000 per couple or $5,000 per individual. So that if you're not making the contribution, then you're not actually taking advantage of this. So simply opening the account is not enough. You need to make the contribution. And if you contribute over what you're allowed to take a tax deduction on, then you can carry forward that contribution and you can use that contribution in future years to write off your taxes. So tip number 2 would be to take advantage of the Baby Scholars program. And you're eligible to receive up to a $100 bonus if you have a child that's under the age of 1 or you adopted a child in the last year. And to collect that bonus, you just simply need to open a CHET account and make them the beneficiary of the account. And then within 60 days of opening the account, that money, that $100 bonus will get deposited into your account. So it's definitely free money that's available to you, but you need to open the account by midnight of the child's first birthday, or within 1 year, if you have adopted a child, within 1 year of the adoption, you need to open the account and name them as the beneficiary. And I'll put a link in the show notes where you can read over these specific rules, but I've highlighted them for the most part. And the beneficiary, which would be your child, also has to be a Connecticut resident to be eligible for this. And it also does point out that only one bonus is eligible per beneficiary. So let's just say you opened a 529 account and then your parents opened a 529 account, both naming your child as the beneficiary. They're only going to be eligible to collect the $100 bonus in one of the accounts. So make sure that you're aware of that. Tip number 3 would be careful of how you invest the money. And these plans are supposed to be set up so that they're easy and it has a minimal amount of effort to you as the investor, but you have to be aware of what's being done, because even though it can be done for you, it might not be the option that is best for you. So you have a few choices. One option is that you choose an age-based portfolio, and these portfolios are set up to be more aggressive when the child is younger, and then over time they become more conservative. And so this is one option for you as well. So that's you can choose that based off when the child will be 18, or you could choose a different age-based option. And then within that, to further confuse you, there are 3 choices that Fidelity offers, or I should say the CHET Plan, which is now run by Fidelity. They offer one option that is all Fidelity funds, another Fidelity actively managed funds, another one that's Fidelity blend funds, which is a mixture of index fund and actively managed funds. And then the third is strictly Fidelity index funds. So I picked one of these funds to do a comparison. I picked the 2036 fund. And so first, looking at the Fidelity managed funds, has an average expense ratio of 0.80%. So that's definitely on the higher side. And I compared the performance, so year to date, and I'm recording this on December 8th. So through December 7th, that fund was down 16%. The Fidelity blend, which is a combination of actively managed and index funds, has an expense ratio of 0.57%. So again, what is an expense ratio? An expense ratio is the annual charge that you're paying And so an expense ratio of 0.80%, for example, means you're paying a little less than 1%, but per every $1,000, that's $8 that you're paying. So that still does add up. And I'd much rather see you in a lower expense ratio fund because studies have shown that when you use a lower expense ratio fund, generally your results are better than higher expense ratio funds. So that Fidelity Blend portfolio has declined 16.68%, so a little more of a decline than the 100% managed portfolio. And then the third option is a Fidelity Index portfolio, which has a lower expense ratio of 0.14%. And so definitely something that I think is more appropriate. And it's declined year-to-date 15.82%, also through December 7th. So that is a little better performance. Part of that reason you're seeing the better performance is that it has a lower expense ratio. So you would expect this index portfolio over time should perform better than the more expensive other two options. I really wish that these other two options weren't even offered, because looking at where the money is, the majority of the money is in the blend fund, which has the higher expense ratio than the index fund. And that might just be by default because this plan was previously hosted by TIAA-CREF, and it changed over to Fidelity a few years ago. And if you remember that I did an episode kind of highlighting those changes, I wasn't really thrilled with it, and I'm still not. But as a consumer, if you're in one of these higher expense ratio funds, you may want to think about switching over to the index fund. So the next option is that you can pick your own funds. And if you want to have more control over what your allocation is, you can pick your own funds. And you can select from 5 equity funds and 3 bond funds. Now, why might you want to pick that? Well, the reason being that if you don't like the allocation, for example, the 2036 fund has roughly 30% in international stocks of the allocation. I think that's a rather high allocation in international stocks. So if you wanted to lessen that, then you might want to pick one of the individual options. So for the 5 equity options, some of them that are rather standard, one is the total stock market index, another one is the S&P 500 index, and another one is the total international index. And those have an expense ratio of about 0.11%, so they're definitely very reasonable. On the fixed income side, on the bond side, you have 3 different funds you could choose from on the individual portfolio. You could choose from the Stable Value Fund, which has an expense ratio of 0.53%, so definitely on the high side, but year-to-date has earned 1.1% since March 29th, so a rather decent yield. But there isn't information on there as far as what the 7 or 30-day yield is. Anytime you're looking at a money market fund, any type of bond fund, this information is usually readily available so that you know what the fund is paying. If you've been keeping track of interest rates, you've known that interest rates have gone higher, and you're able to get a much better yield on your short-term money now. So that the yield on this fund should probably be in the 2 or 3% range, but there isn't any information on there. And I've even reached out to Fidelity a few times. Unfortunately, the people answering the 1-800 number really don't know a whole lot. My next step is probably going to reach out to the Connecticut Treasurer, because that's who is supposed to be watching this, to see if we can get more information about that. And the next fixed income fund is the Connecticut Bank Deposit Fund, and that also has an expense ratio, I would say, rather high of 0.5%, 0.5%, and it's only earned net of fees 0.6%. And it has a longer track record since February 2nd of 2021, but there isn't any information about how the fund performed in 2021. There's only information about 2022. And the third option, the Intermediate Treasury, has a low expense ratio of 0.12%, but year to date it's down 10.74%. So that's not very good. Now, given what's going on with bonds, interest rates have gone up tremendously this year. It's been one of the biggest increases in a very long time of interest rates. So that is the absolute enemy of bonds. So I certainly wouldn't expect that the Intermediate Treasury Fund, which is an index fund, to be positive. But I would expect the other funds to have some more disclosure and information so that you can know what you're getting. So if you were trying to protect your portfolio from further interest rate declines, you'd probably be better off staying away from the intermediate treasury and using either the stable value or the Connecticut bank deposit. And you may even want to stay out of the target date funds if you wanted to have a more active role in the management of your portfolio. The only problem is that with all 529 plans, you can only reallocate your funds twice per year. So that means if you make a change over the individual portfolio this year, you can only make one more change before the end of the year. Now, granted, next year you can make 2 changes, but you're still limited to making those changes twice per year. So it's definitely an advantage to be in one of the target-based portfolios or age-based because the management's done for you. But the negative is I don't think they're doing a really good job. I would like to see them using one of the fixed income options, either stable value or the bank deposit, to try to protect the portfolio better. But they're not. So you could do that yourself if you want to take charge of the account and then maybe do a rebalance a couple times per year, and you'll probably be okay. But you are limited to those 2 changes per year. So tip number 4 is make sure if you open one of these accounts that you're using it for qualified expenses. Now, even if you have a son or daughter who are going off to college next year, maybe they're even in college now, and you're still going to be writing bills for tuition, then you may want to think about opening one of these accounts because let's just say you're planning next year to write a $10,000 tuition check. You could put the money into the 529 plan. You could choose one of the individual options, either the stable value or the Connecticut bank deposit. Your money really shouldn't lose any value. It'll probably gain a little bit of interest. And then you can pull the money right back out, and you've just created a tax deduction for yourself. If you're in the 5.5% Connecticut state income tax bracket, then you've saved roughly $550 in Connecticut state income taxes just by going through this process. Open the account, put the money in, and take it out. So I think it's definitely worth it. Just so you're aware, what are qualified expenses? Well, tuition and fees qualify, books and supplies, computers, computer software, internet access, room and board, and there is a part stipulation on that your child must be at least half-time enrolled in school for this to qualify for room and board. And I believe even if they're living in if they have off-campus housing and they have to pay it over the summer, as a lot of places do require you to do, this would still qualify. If they need any special equipment because they have special needs, you also can take up to $10,000 out lifetime and pay off student loans. And you can also use $10,000 per year to pay for elementary school tuition or secondary school, so for high school or middle school. So that's another great way that you can use these accounts. So what doesn't qualify? Unfortunately, renting a car, maintaining a vehicle, paying for other travel costs like flying them home. Unfortunately, you can't use it for that. Health insurance doesn't qualify. That's always a shocker to me, but the only way that would qualify is that if the school built that into part of the tuition fee every year, like some schools do. If you couldn't opt out, then it could qualify. But if you're paying for a supplemental health care plan, unfortunately, that doesn't qualify. And then also college application and testing fees don't qualify. So there are a number of things that you can use it for. And the fifth thing to be aware of is that there's tremendous tax-deferred growth that you could create with one of these accounts. So let's just say you do have a younger child. They're maybe going away to college 10 years from now. The benefit of opening these accounts and putting the money in is that the interest in dividends that you would otherwise pay tax on is now being deferred in this account. So the alternative would be if you subscribe to my investment philosophy, which is by using low-cost index funds, you open a portfolio somewhere, you're buying a few index funds, and you're paying minimal fees, but you're paying taxes every year on the dividends or interest that those funds are generating. So that's reducing your return. Well, if you instead used a 529 plan like this, the benefit is that those interest and dividends are tax deferred and they're not taxed. And if you use it for those qualified expenses, they're never taxed. But if you don't use it for qualified expenses, let's just say you set one of these accounts up years ago, your child, either the cost of college was less than you anticipated or they received some scholarships, you don't need this money. You have a couple options. One, you could just take it out, pay the tax on the gains, and you'd also pay a 10% penalty. So that would have been better than probably not having this, because you would have been paying taxes all along on those funds. Another option is you can name another beneficiary. You could name another child, or you can even name yourself. And as long as the 529 plan has a natural person named as the beneficiary, you can leave these accounts in there for a long time. Every state differs, but it's kind of a gray area. And as far as I'm aware, none of these states are really forcing you, including the CHET plan, to take the money out. So it could sit in there a long time, and then at some point the money would have to come out, and then you'd pay the taxes or penalties. So it is a way that you can defer and you can really grow your money. The negative, I would say, with the CHET plan are some of the limited investment options. They don't have a small cap fund. They don't have a large selection of individual funds. There are many other 529 plans out there, such as Vanguard has a few plans, one with the state of Nevada, that has much better individual investment options. So what you always could do, if you wanted to go to the extra step, you could open the CHET plan to get the tax deduction. You could also open a plan with another plan, let's say with Vanguard, and you could transfer your money from the CHET plan over to the Vanguard plan. So it gave you a broader investment selection. You're still going to be limited to 2 changes per year, but it can give you a much broader investment selection if you want to have a more diversified portfolio and have a greater investment selection. So I hope these 5 tips were helpful to get the most out of your CHET plan, and you still have a little bit of time. Again, you have till the end of this year to make a contribution and get a tax deduction for 2022. Have a great week. I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. Take care.